She was only 16, and that little motel room was the only place that didn't ask questions. The note was wrinkled, the pencil almost out of lead. She wrote it fast, but every word carried the weight of her heart. "I'm sorry. Please take care of him. He's your son." It was a cold night, and the gate in front of the mansion looked taller than she remembered. She placed the baby gently on the step, wrapped in the only blanket she had, the note tucked close to his tiny chest. She didn't ring the bell, just stood there for a few seconds, watching, like someone saying goodbye to their own soul. Then she ran. No one saw her face that night, but the security camera caught her silhouette, trembling, small, vanishing into the dark. Inside that mansion lived a man the world knew by his last name, but inside, he was all silence, a solitary billionaire, sharp, distant, precise, the kind of man who looked at the world like it had already failed him. When he found the baby at dawn, he hesitated, read the letter, and something deep inside him, something he didn't have words for, stirred. It wasn't pity, it wasn't duty, it was something older than that. Like an ache he'd long forgotten, remembering its name. He called a nanny, then a lawyer, then a doctor. He handled it like a transaction. But somewhere between the formula and the crying, his heart, the one he claimed not to have, began to listen again. Years passed. The boy grew up in a world of tutors and toy-strewn rooms and gardens trimmed like museums. But sometimes, late at night, he'd whisper, "Why did my mom leave me here?" And the billionaire now called Dad had no answer, because that same question lived quietly inside him too. So, if you've ever felt like the world gave up on someone far too soon, come sit with me, darling. This is a story of lost babies, found hearts, and a second cradle. It was an old roadside motel, peeling walls, bleach-stained sheets, and a blinking sign that spelled Vaka Envai, room 3B. That's where she stayed 2 nights after leaving the baby. The silence in that room wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. She'd wake up from nothing and still hear him crying, even though he wasn't there. She still had milk in her breasts, but empty arms ache worse than hunger. On the dusty dresser sat a cardboard coaster with the motel's faded gold logo. She traced the baby's name on it with her finger. Tiny, just to remind herself that he was real. That morning she tried calling a caseworker, hung up before it rang, tried writing a letter to her mama, the one who hadn't spoken to her since she was 12, ripped it in half, tried to eat, threw it up. She was 16, and already knew how it felt to be disposable. The world never gives gentle hands to girls who bleed too early. In the room next door, 3C, was a man who also kept to himself. Folks said he stayed there sometimes to disappear. Never smiled. Never spoke, just smoked by the window and paid in cash. Some said he was ex-military. Others said he was a rich man running from his own house. That afternoon she went to the front desk for more toilet paper. He was there, button-down shirt open at the collar, eyes like an old war. Their eyes met. He didn't ask anything. She didn't either. But something passed between them, something wordless. That night, she cried louder, didn't hide it. That night he didn't light his cigarette. He just sat by the window, listening, and by morning, she was coughing blood. The cough wouldn't stop. It echoed against the thin motel walls, ragged and red. She tried to muffle it with the pillow, but the pillow was damp from last night's tears. She hadn't eaten in almost 2 days. Her body, already too young to bear what it had, was beginning to unravel. She curled into herself like a child, knees to chest, shivering. And then, a knock. Not loud, not angry, just steady. She froze. No one ever knocked here. Wrapped in the motel's scratchy blanket, she shuffled to the door, peeked through the slat. It was him. Room 3C, the man with the tired eyes. In his hand, a paper bag and a bottle of ginger ale. She hesitated, then cracked the door. Just an inch. He didn't look at her like she was dirty, didn't look at her like she was broken. Just said, "You sound sick." Held the bag out and added, "It's not much. Soup. Crackers. That's all." She didn't answer, just took the bag. And before she could say, "Thank you," he was gone, back to his silence. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands shaking, opened the bag like it was sacred. Inside, a folded napkin with 2 words scrawled in pen. "You're not alone." She read those words 5 times, 10, and for the first time in days, she let herself believe them. But that night, as she drifted to sleep with broth in her belly and salt still on her cheeks, her phone buzzed. Block number. No voicemail. She checked again and saw one photo, a baby, in someone's arms, in front of a mansion, and her knees buckled. She stared at the photo until her eyes burned. Her hands, thin and trembling, hovered over the screen. It was him, she knew, even through the blur. Even with the fancy sweater, the soft lighting, the expensive stroller, she knew those cheeks, that mouth, her baby. Someone had sent her the photo. No caption, no explanation, just proof. She didn't know how they'd found her, didn't know why now, but it undid her, tore through the walls she'd been building with threadbare strength. That night she didn't cry. She howled, bit the pillow to stop the sound, curled into the motel floor like an animal, like something feral and forgotten. And in room 3C, he heard. The next morning there was a knock again, same rhythm, same silence. This time she opened the door. Her hair was unwashed, eyes swollen, skin pale as winter. But she stood. He didn't ask questions, just handed her a cup of coffee and sat on the ground outside her door. After a long time, he said, "I had a daughter once," then looked away, sipped his own coffee like it burned. She didn't answer, but sat too. 2 strangers, 2 ghosts, sitting on the cold concrete between rooms 3B and 3C. She finally whispered, "His name is Caleb." Her voice broke like glass. He didn't look surprised, just nodded, like the name mattered, like it meant something. And then he reached into his pocket, pulled out something small, a necklace, simple, silver, with a charm shaped like a cradle. He didn't explain it, didn't offer it, just held it in his palm, like a secret he wasn't ready to give. But something in his eyes said, "I've lost things too." And right then, in that quiet space between 2 rooms and 2 broken people, she asked without meaning to, "Can you drive me somewhere?" He blinked, nodded. "Where?" She looked down, voice barely a whisper. "Back to the gate." They left just after sundown. She wore a borrowed hoodie that smelled faintly of motor oil and peppermint gum. He drove an old pickup with a cracked dashboard and a glove box full of unopened letters. Neither of them said much, but the silence between them wasn't empty. It was gentle. She stared out the window, watching the world blur by. Fences, fields, diners with neon lights. Her hands clutched the motel's coffee cup like it could keep her anchored. He drove slow, careful, like someone who knew what it was to break and be expected to keep going. When they reached the gates, she didn't speak at first, just stared. It was all still there. The stone pillars, the tall iron bars, the camera tilted just so. The same cold air, the same ache in her chest. She took a step forward, then froze. "I left him right there," she said, voice raw. "Right by that crack in the stone." He looked too, didn't offer comfort, didn't fill the silence, just stood beside her, present. And that sometimes is more powerful than any answer. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a slip of paper, folded, unfolded, creased from being held too tight. It was the letter, the one she'd written the night she let go. "Do you think he still has it?" she whispered. "The man inside?" The driver tilted his head. "You mean his father?" She flinched. "I don't know if he is." He didn't correct her, didn't push, just waited. Then, suddenly, the gates opened. Someone had seen them, and from the front porch, a figure stepped into the light. Tall, expensive coat, still and unreadable. And in his arms, a child. The child squirmed in the man's arms, then stilled, wide eyes peering out across the yard. And in that frozen breath between worlds, she whispered, "That's him." She didn't run, didn't call out, just stood like someone remembering how to breathe. The man, the billionaire, didn't move, didn't wave. He just looked, but not at her, at the man beside her, then at the truck, then back to her. He recognized her, somewhere beneath the sunken cheeks, the hoodie, the hollowness. He knew. She could feel judgment rising like a wave. But then, the boy reached up, touched the side of his guardian's face, and said softly, "Who's that lady?" That broke something. In her, in the man, in the quiet. The billionaire knelt to the boy's height and whispered something into his ear. then pointed toward the gate. The boy squinted, stepped forward. 1 tiny step, 2. She dropped to her knees. Tears fell freely now. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. He stood a few feet away, curious, cautious, clutching a little wooden toy in one hand, a bird with wings that flapped when he ran. He didn't run. Not yet. She stayed still, let him come as he wished. And then he reached her, touched her knee, and asked, "Do I know you?" She covered her mouth with both hands. Behind her, the man from the motel slowly stepped forward, but stopped when he saw the billionaire's eyes narrow. There was tension in the air, old wounds, unspoken things, and in that crackling quiet, the billionaire finally spoke. "Why are you here?" But his voice wasn't cold. It was tired, maybe even hopeful. And that's when the man from the motel did something no one expected. He stepped forward and said, "She didn't come alone." The billionaire stared at the man from the motel, eyes narrowing, brow furrowed, like trying to remember a dream you lost too young. "You brought her here?" he asked. The words weren't cruel, but they weren't kind either. "I didn't bring her," the man replied. She asked. The boy stood between them, looking up, tiny, curious, with that toy bird flapping in his hand. "Do you know him, Daddy?" the child asked, and the question seemed to hang in the air like a thread no one dared pull. The billionaire looked down at the boy, then at the girl he hadn't seen in 6 years. She was no longer the terrified teenager he remembered on the security footage. But she wasn't whole either. She stood barefoot in the gravel, hoodie sleeves too long, eyes rimmed in red, but with a spine made of something steel-like and sorrowful. "I wrote you a letter," she said. Her voice didn't tremble. "I thought you'd never read it." "I did," he said quietly. "I've read it more times than I can count." She didn't know what to say to that. She didn't know what she'd hoped he'd say. Behind her, the motel man shifted his weight, ready to leave. But the boy, Caleb, reached for his hand. "Are you my uncle?" the child asked. It broke them both. The billionaire looked away. The girl covered her mouth, and the man just knelt down. "No, kiddo," he said softly. "I'm not your uncle. I'm just someone who saw your mama when she couldn't see herself." The billionaire's eyes flickered. He watched the way Caleb touched the man's shoulder, with trust, with ease, with something he himself had never earned. And then he said something no one expected. "Come inside, all of you." The girl hesitated, but the man beside her just nodded. "I'll wait in the truck," he said. And she turned, just before stepping into the house, and asked the question that had lived in her chest for 6 long winters. "Did you ever name him something else?" The billionaire paused, then shook his head. "No, I waited for you to come back." The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt arranged, like someone had moved all the grief into the attic. He led her through polished floors, past tall windows, into a room painted soft blue. It was Caleb's room. Books lined the shelves, notebooks half colored in. A toy train set frozen mid-curve. There was a photo on the dresser. Not of the billionaire. Not of her. Just the baby, maybe 3 months old, wrapped in that same warm blanket she'd left behind. She reached for it with trembling fingers. "You kept it," she whispered. He stood by the door, hands in pockets. "I kept everything," he said. "Your note, the blanket, even the shoes he outgrew." Her knees gave. She sat on the edge of the twin bed. "I didn't want to leave him," she said. I didn't think I could give him a life." He didn't answer right away, just crossed the room, opened the closet. Inside, row after row of baby clothes, some still in boxes. "I tried to become a father overnight," he said, "but it didn't happen that way. He didn't need a man who knew contracts. He needed someone to sit with him when the nightmares came." "And did you?" she asked. He turned. "I tried." She looked up at him, not angry, not bitter, just tired, like someone who had run all the way through the storm, only to realize she'd left her name behind. "I want to know him," she said. "I'm not here to take him. I want to know who he became." He stared at her for a long time, then said, "Then start here." And he handed her a drawing, crayon on cheap paper. 3 stick figures, a man, a boy, and a shadow holding their hands. She traced the lines with her thumb, and in the corner, in shaky letters, "Me, Daddy, the lady from my dreams." She covered her mouth, tears flooding again. But just as she began to speak, they heard a knock. back at the front door. Not the motel man. Someone else. Someone from the past. The knock echoed down the hallway, soft but certain, like someone who'd waited too long to turn back now. She stood. He stayed still. Even Caleb, now playing quietly on the rug, seemed to pause. Another knock, and then a voice. "Is Evelyn here?" She froze. No one had called her that in years. Not since before the baby, before the motel, before the leaving. Evelyn. That name wasn't just a sound. It was a wound. The billionaire stepped forward, opening the door just enough to see. Then his jaw tightened. Outside stood a woman, older, worn, hair streaked with grey, coat buttoned all the way to her throat, like armor. The girl took a breath, stepped into the hallway, eyes wide. "Mom?" It was almost too soft to hear, but the word carried years of ache. The woman looked her over, up, down, as if counting bones, sins, and scars. "I heard you were back," she said. "I didn't believe it until I saw the truck." The girl swallowed. She hadn't seen her mother since she was 12, the day she was dropped at a foster home with nothing but a backpack and a box of crackers. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. The woman didn't flinch. "Maybe not, but I never stopped looking." "That's not true," Evelyn snapped. "You stopped the day you let them take me." Silence, like a clock, stopped ticking. "I was sick," the woman said. "I was drowning. I didn't know how to be your mother." "And I didn't know how to be one either," Evelyn whispered. "But I became one, even if just for a few hours." Behind her, Caleb peeked around the corner, saw the stranger, then ducked back. The older woman leaned against the doorframe. Her voice broke. "I came to tell you. Your father died last winter. He left you something." Evelyn shook her head. "I don't want anything from him." "It wasn't money," the woman said. "It was a letter. He wrote it for you the day you left." And from her coat pocket, she pulled a yellowed envelope, folded, unopened. Evelyn stared at it. Her hand reached out, stopped. Because sometimes what we've waited a lifetime to hear is also what we fear most. And just as she took the envelope, Caleb stepped into the hallway and said, "Mommy." The world stopped breathing. She dropped the letter. That one word, soft, unsure, innocent, cut through every locked room in her heart. Caleb stood at the hallway's edge, one sock on, hair wild from play, eyes round with wonder. "Mommy," he said again, quieter this time, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to say it. Evelyn didn't move, didn't breathe. The billionaire stepped forward, his hand gently reaching for Caleb's shoulder. But Caleb stepped toward her first. "Is it okay if I call you that?" he asked. And that broke her. She knelt down, arms wide open, and he walked into them like he'd been there 1,000 times before. No instructions, no confusion, just instinct. She held him, tight, pressed her nose into his hair and wept. "Yes," she whispered, "you can call me that. You've always been allowed." Behind them, the woman, her mother, stepped back, as if the scene was too holy to touch. And the billionaire, he sat, not out of defeat, but reverence, because something sacred was happening, and he knew it wasn't his to own. Later, in the stillness of the blue room, Caleb asked, "Why did you leave me?" And for the first time, she answered without shame, "Because I thought love meant stepping away, but now I know. Love means staying." He leaned into her, soft, sleepy. "Are you staying now?" She kissed his forehead. "I'm not going anywhere, baby." But just as she closed her eyes, the letter her father left, the one she hadn't dared read, slipped from her lap and fell open on the floor. And inside was a name she didn't expect. Not hers, not her father's, but his. The man from room 3C. The name on the letter wasn't long, but it hit like thunder in a field too dry. "For Thomas Hale." Evelyn blinked, whispered the name aloud like she was tasting it for the first time. It wasn't hers, wasn't her father's, and yet something in it felt familiar. The billionaire heard it too. He stepped forward, brow furrowed. "That's the man who brought you here," he said. "The one from the motel." She nodded slowly. "I never knew his name. He never told me." And yet, here it was, in her father's handwriting. A message left in the final weeks of a life filled with regrets. She unfolded the rest of the letter with careful fingers. Inside, only a few lines. "If he's still alive, tell him I'm sorry. Tell him I saw what he tried to be, what I never had the strength to become. No explanations, no family tree, just sorrow, pressed between paper like dried flowers. The billionaire read it over her shoulder, then stepped away, quiet, thoughtful. You think he knew your father? He asked. I don't know, she said, but I need to ask. She tucked the letter into her pocket, kissed Caleb on the cheek, and whispered something to the billionaire. Will you watch him for a little while? He didn't hesitate. Of course. And with her heart pounding louder than the wind, she stepped back out into the night, letter in hand, hoodie zipped to the throat, and returned to the truck parked beneath the street lamp. Thomas was leaning against the door, arms crossed, the same steady presence, the same quiet anchor. But when she handed him the letter, his hands trembled. He read it slowly, twice, 3 times, and then he sat down on the curb like the earth had shifted under him. I thought he was dead a long time ago, he murmured. Evelyn's voice was barely audible. You knew him? Thomas looked at her, and in his eyes was something ancient and fragile. He was my brother. The night was quiet. Even the wind seemed to stop to listen. Thomas rubbed his thumb along the edge of the paper, as if he could erase the years between them. My older brother, he said softly. Name was Alan. We used to share a room, a bike, a dream of getting out of our nowhere town. Evelyn listened, cross-legged on the curb, as the streetlight bathed them in gold and grief. He left when I was 17, Thomas said. No note, no goodbye, just gone. She waited, didn't rush. Sometimes the hardest truths need silence to find their way out. I followed him once, he continued. 2 towns over, found him in a bar, drunk. Told me I didn't want to know the kind of man he was becoming. Evelyn stared at the gravel. Her voice trembled. He told me he wasn't strong enough to be my father. Thomas looked up. What? She nodded slowly. My father, Alan. He left me too. Dropped me off and disappeared. Thomas shook his head in disbelief. Your father was my brother? The words fell between them like a stone in water. 2 abandoned souls sitting side by side, realizing the same man had left them both to piece their lives back together, alone. Evelyn let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for years. I guess we were both left at different doors. He chuckled softly, but there was no joy in it, just recognition. They sat in silence after that. No more questions, no more names, just the sound of their own hearts trying to understand what it means to be family after a lifetime of being strangers. And just when she thought the night had shown all its truth, Thomas reached into the glove box, pulled out a tiny time-worn photo. 2 boys, one with a scraped knee, one with a freckled smile, arms around each other. That's him, Thomas said. Alan. Evelyn took the photo. Her fingers shook, and in the back of the picture, in childish handwriting, Thomas plus Alan Arsh, second Cradle. She looked up, tears in her eyes. You were his second chance. Thomas closed his eyes. No, you are. The next morning the sky was pale and open. A kind of hush hung in the air, like the world was waiting for something gentle to happen. Evelyn returned to the house with Thomas at her side. She held the old photo between 2 fingers, pressed like a leaf in a book no one thought would be opened again. Inside, Caleb was sitting at the kitchen table, eating toast cut into stars. The billionaire was across from him, reading the paper but not really reading, eyes lifting every few seconds, watching the boy. When Evelyn stepped in, Caleb's face lit up. Did you go far? He asked. She smiled. Not too far, just far enough to come back different. The billionaire stood, nodded to Thomas. There was no handshake, no grand introduction. Just a quiet, you're welcome here. It meant more than it sounded. They sat, 4 people who didn't quite know what to do with the word family, but who were trying to hold it gently anyway. Caleb climbed onto Thomas's lap like it was nothing. Like love didn't need a name, just a lap that didn't flinch. Thomas froze for a second, then smiled. Hey there, little man. Evelyn watched them, watched the man who had found her in room 3B, now holding the boy she'd left at a gate. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like a ghost in her own story. Later they walked the grounds of the mansion, Caleb chasing butterflies, Thomas and the billionaire trailing behind. You kept him alive, the billionaire said, not just with food or money, but with patience, with presence. Thomas didn't respond right away. Then, quietly, I didn't save her. She saved herself, but I stayed close enough so she didn't forget she could. The billionaire stopped walking, looked at him. There was no rivalry in his face, only understanding. I didn't know how to raise a child, he said. I just didn't want to be my father. Thomas nodded. None of us did. That's why we try harder. And back by the tree swing, Evelyn sat watching Caleb, a light breeze in her hair, sunlight warm on her hands. She pulled out her old letter again, the one she'd written 6 years ago. And this time she read it not with shame, but with mercy, because now she knew that letter wasn't an end. It was a beginning. And just as she stood to call Caleb for lunch, he shouted something that made them all turn. "Look what I found!" He was holding something, dirt-covered, small, metal. Evelyn rushed over, took it gently. It was a key, old, rusty, tied with red string. She stared at it and remembered the locker she'd left behind in the bus station all those years ago, with the rest of the story still inside. The key was cold in her hand, but her chest burned with something wild and wordless. "I thought it was gone," she whispered. Thomas, who stood beside her now like a shadow that chose to stay, asked gently, "What is it?" "A locker," she said. "Bus station. Gate 12. I left it there the night I gave Caleb up. Everything I couldn't carry. It's still there." The billionaire looked at her with something like awe. "You never went back?" "I couldn't," she said. "I thought I didn't deserve to open it again." That afternoon they all went. No press, no driver. Just the 4 of them in the old truck. Evelyn, Thomas, the billionaire, and a curious little boy with a juice box. The bus station hadn't changed. Still smelled like old gum and engine grease. Still echoed with voices going somewhere else. Gate 12 was quiet, and the locker was still there. She slipped the key in. It stuck, then clicked. Inside, a baby onesie, worn soft with hope. A notebook, edges curled. An ultrasound photo, a rosary she never had the courage to use, and a cassette tape, labeled in faded ink. If someone ever asks who I was, she sat down on the cold metal bench, held the things one by one, each item, a version of her, younger, more afraid, still trying. The notebook was full, letters she'd written to Caleb over the years, never mailed, never finished. She turned to one, dated just days after he was born. "You don't know me yet, but I know every inch of you. I left you, not because I didn't love you, but because I loved you more than I loved my own skin." Her hand trembled. Thomas sat beside her, said nothing, just let her cry. The billionaire kneeled in front of her. "Can I?" he asked, reaching for the tape. She nodded. He held it up to the light, like he was holding a heartbeat. "We'll find a player," he said. "I want to hear it too." "And Caleb?" He crawled up onto the bench beside her, put his head on her shoulder and said, "I don't need to know who you were. I like who you are now." She kissed the top of his head and whispered, "I like her too." But just as they turned to leave, an old station clerk stepped forward, holding something in his hands. "You left this too," he said. "It's been in the lost and found since that night." And in his hands was the diary of a teenage girl, her name on the cover. And the first page wasn't written by her. It was written by him. The diary cover was cracked, soft from years of waiting. Her name still visible, written in teenage loops. Evelyn Rose Harper. She opened the first page with a hush in her breath, expecting old poems, old fears. But instead, there was his handwriting, her father's. "To the girl I couldn't raise. To the woman I hope you'll become. Forgive me. I never built you a home. But I built a cradle, in words, in memory. Maybe one day you'll find it." She closed her eyes, let the tears fall. But they weren't heavy anymore. They were soft, like rain after a long dry season. Back at the mansion, the 4 of them sat on the porch, sun setting behind the trees, crickets beginning their nightly hymn. Thomas leaned back in his chair, hands behind his head. The billionaire, no longer wearing his title like armor, held a cup of coffee with both hands. Caleb was asleep in a hammock strung between 2 columns, his toy bird tucked against his chest. And Evelyn, she sat on the steps, barefoot, hair loose, whole. They didn't talk much that night, just watched the stars come out one by one, until the billionaire finally said, "I used to think money could fix anything. Thomas chuckled softly. And now I know, he said. Some things aren't meant to be fixed. Just held until they stop shaking. Evelyn looked at both of them. Two men. One who gave the boy a house, the other who gave her a place to heal. She stood, walked barefoot across the porch, and kissed them both gently on the head. "Thank you," she whispered. Not for saving her, but for staying. Later that night, she tucked Caleb in. He stirred, half asleep. "Mama?" "Yes, baby. Are we a real family now?" She smiled through the dim lamplight, tucked the blanket under his chin. "Yes," she said. "We always were. We just had to find our way back to each other." He closed his eyes, and as she sat there, watching him breathe, Thomas appeared in the doorway. In his hand, a gift. The silver necklace, the cradle charm. He placed it in her palm. No words, just a nod. And when she looked down, she saw it not as a symbol of what was broken, but of what had been mended, quietly, over time. Some stories don't end with weddings or riches or grand declarations. Some end with a cradle, and two people finally feeling safe enough to sleep. Miss Martha's voice, warm and low. If this story found a little corner in your heart, leave a comment, all right? The porch light's always on here at Second Cradle.